Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really trying to give you a shortcut, a way to understand the forces shaping our world right now. We're looking at the engines, the friction points of modern change economics, tech, even what's on our plates. We've got this huge stack of sources, and our mission really is to pull out the rules governing all this constant transformation. Why is everything always churning, and why is there always pushback?
Yeah, it's complex, isn't it? But a lot of it traces back to Joseph Schumpeter's big idea, creative destruction. It's this idea that innovation isn't just gentle improvement. It often requires the painful end of existing companies, technologies, even lifestyle. So the core tension we see everywhere is this constant battle between that essential destruction and, our desire for stability and protection. Governments want it, people want it.
Okay, yeah, let's definitely unpack that. Starting with the economics piece. Schumpeter's argument was basically that capitalism needs constant upheaval to survive. He wasn't just talking about competition on price. He meant innovators coming in and fundamentally threatening the existence of established firms with totally new ways of doing things.
Right. And it helps to remember Schumpeter himself was quite a character, not just some dusty academic. The sources mention he was incredibly ambitious, famously said he wanted to be the world's greatest economist, lover, and horseman. Later admitted he was maybe failing only on the horseman part.
He actually said that.
Apparently so. And he had this intensity. There's this amazing story from 1909 where he fought a duel with a librarian because the guy wouldn't let his students access certain books. He clearly felt strongly about things.
Wow. Okay. So while Schumpeter saw this destruction as necessary, like for the system's health, when crises actually hit, the political pressure is always for stability, right? Which usually means bailouts.
Exactly. And that's where we hit this major conflict highlighted in the sources. The Austrian School of Economics, they're fundamentally against these kinds of stabilization efforts.
Why is that? What's their core objection?
Well, they see downturns and business failures not as disasters to be avoided at all costs, but as necessary corrections. Painful, yes, but necessary. It's the market essentially saying, look, these resources were allocated unwisely. A failing firm means consumers have decided its products aren't good enough or efficient enough compared to alternatives.
But hang on, doesn't that view kind of ignore the immediate human cost? Like massive job losses, communities devastated. Is that politically realistic or just theoretical?
That's the absolute crux of the political versus economic tension, isn't it? The Austrians would argue that trying to achieve short-term political stability through bailouts actually harms the economy in the long run. When the government saves a failing company, it traps resources capital, skilled labor that the market was trying to free up for potentially better uses elsewhere. And this leads straight to their main critique. Bailouts create moral hazard.
Right, moral hazard. Can you break that down for us? What does that look like practically?
Sure. Moral hazard is basically when decision makers, say bank executives, take on huge unproductive risks because they know they're protected from the worst consequences. If your bank is deemed too big to fail, the government, meaning the taxpayer, will have to step in and cover your losses if things go bad. The Austrians call this an unsanctionable expropriation. Basically, it's taxpayers involuntarily footing the bill for bad corporate bets. It's systematic.
So it's not just about saving a company in the moment. You're saying it actually encourages risky behavior down the line.
Yes, exactly. And crucially, it stops the market from doing its job of reallocating those scarce resources.
Meaning the best engineers or the capital get stuck in a company that should have failed instead of going to, say, the next big innovative startup.
Precisely. That failure to reallocate is the key long-term cost. It ultimately leads to less wealth creation for the nation over time. The government reduces the short-term pain, maybe, but blocks the long-term cure.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From economic theory to applied technology. This is where who drives the change gets really interesting.
Yeah.
We often picture the lone genius inventor, right?
Right. But the sources paint a very different picture, especially for the U.S. after World War II. The government's role was absolutely massive.
So.
Well, that initial post-war tech dominance, almost entirely fueled by military R&D spending. Think about it. Radar, jet engines, advanced electronics, nuclear tech, and even the groundwork for the internet coming out of places like MIT, Bell Labs, Stanford, often with government contracts. But it wasn't just the labs.
It wasn't just inventing stuff. It was creating the market for it, too.
Exactly. Things like the GI Bill, federally backed mortgages. They created this huge new middle class of homeowners. Combine that with building the interstate highway system. It wasn't just about roads. It fueled the whole suburban boom. Massive demand for cars, appliances, everything. The government was actively shaping the conditions for creative destruction to happen.
But that kind of state-led technological march wasn't unstoppable, was it? The sources show pushback developing, resistance.
Definitely. You had the rise of consumer advocacy, think Ralph Nader, questioning if new products were actually safe or necessary. People started asking harder questions.
It wasn't just individuals, right? It became institutional.
Absolutely. Congress actually canceled the American Supersonic Transport Plane, the SST project, basically decided it was too costly, environmentally or economically. And around the same time, in the 60s and 70s, the public's view of technology started to sour. You had growing awareness of pollution, like DDT. The Vietnam War, which felt like a failure despite all the tech involved, and then big accidents like 3 Mile Island. Technology started looking risky, damaging even, not just like pure progress.
That push and pull, you see it internationally too, which kind of leads us to the role of culture. Look at Japan.
Oh yeah, Japan's fascinating. They used to absolutely dominate consumer electronics. Sony Walkman, Trinitron TVs, those super advanced phones before the iPhone hit.
What happened there? The sources mentioned external pressures.
Yeah, there were external things like aggressive U.S. legal challenges, the IBM case is mentioned, and being sort of shut out of key research, like the EUV lithography for chip making that ASML in the Netherlands ran with.
But it wasn't just external factor?
No, and this is maybe the more telling part. The internal barriers seem really significant. Japan's corporate culture, it tends to value stability, hierarchy, predictability, maybe over-disruptive risk-taking.
How does that play out?
Well, the sources suggest the system can actually punish young people for trying something different, for getting off that traditional salaryman career path. It's like this cultural aversion to risk acts as its own kind of internal bailout. It protects the status quo, but it stifles that messy, necessary creative destruction Schumpeter talked about.
And the result?
It's pretty stark. Japan, still a tech giant in many ways, has only about 12 tech unicorns, those billion-dollar startups. Compare that to the UK, a much smaller economy, which is over 100.
Wow. That really shows how culture itself can be a major brake on dynamism. Okay, let's take this whole idea, disruption meeting friction, and apply it somewhere really fundamental, our food system.
Right. The shift towards plant-based eating.
Yeah.
Driven by big concerns, climate change, health.
This is creative destruction aimed squarely at one of our oldest industries, agriculture.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the scale of the challenge is just immense. We saw data from a Danish diet study. Average meat consumption was high, about 150 grams a day. And yeah, meat eating days had much higher greenhouse gas emissions, more land use. But get this, only about 2% of the diet days they tracked were actually meat-free. 2%. So the potential for change is huge, but so is the inertia.
And changing that isn't just about convincing people it's a good idea, right? There are practical hurdles, major friction points.
Absolutely. Even people who care about the environment are slow to switch because, frankly, a lot of the current plant-based options, well, they can be inconvenient or expensive or just not very enjoyable. Taste and texture are king for most consumers.
Which puts the pressure back on the food technologists.
Exactly. And the sources explain it's a really tough technical problem. It's much easier, relatively speaking, to mimic processed meat, things like burgers, sausages, nuggets, where the original structure is gone.
Because it's ground up and reformed anyway.
Right. But replicating the complex, fibrous texture of unprocessed meat, like a steak or a chicken breast, that's the holy grail. And it's incredibly difficult. Mimicking muscle, fat, how it cooks, that's a huge scientific challenge.
So where is the innovation coming from right now? What materials are they using?
Well, the common ones are soy, wheat gluten, pea protein. But the really disruptive potential seems to lie in things like microalgae. They're protein-rich, they actually capture CO2 as they grow, need way less land than traditional crops or animals, and crucially, they can be a source of those essential omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA.
Okay, microalgae sounds promising. But even with these new ingredients, there are still big nutritional challenges, right? Hurdles the industry has to overcome for plant-based diets to truly replace traditional ones for the masses.
Oh, absolutely. These are major friction points that require serious innovation.
Walk us through the big ones. What are the key nutrients we need to worry about?
Okay, first up is vitamin B12. Absolutely essential for nerves, making blood cells, and it's almost entirely found in animal products.
But foods are certified, aren't they?
Some are, yes, but the science suggests fortified foods alone often aren't enough for the long haul. Supplementation is usually necessary for strict vegans, and there's a complication. Some popular alternatives, like spirulina algae, contain B12 analogs in active forms that can actually mess up blood tests and hide a real deficiency. So, tricky.
Okay, B12 is one. What else?
Next is vitamin D. There's a global deficiency problem anyway. And D3, which is the form our bodies use best, mainly comes from animal sources. Vegans are definitely at higher risk. Finding good, bioavailable plant-based D3 and getting it into foods easily is a challenge.
Makes sense. And the third?
Omega-3s, specifically the long-chain ones, EPA and DHA. They're vital for brain health, heart health. Plants give us ALA, another omega-3, but our bodies are pretty inefficient at converting ALA into the EPA and DHA we really need. Which brings us back to things like cultured microalgae. They're becoming a necessary source of direct EPA-DHA for many people on plant-based diets. Technology has to step in where the natural conversion is just too low.
So you've got this push for change, driven by climate and health, hitting these technical and nutritional roadblocks, and then inevitably you get the pushback from the established industry, right? Fighting for stability.
Absolutely. You see the friction pop up immediately in policy debates, like labeling. The meat industry is fighting hard to keep words like burger or sausage exclusive to animal products. The plant-based side argues, hey, we need those terms so consumers know what the product is like, how it tastes, how you cook it. It's a fight over language and expectation.
And it's not just labeling, is it? The sources mentioned something about methane metrics, GWP. How does that fit in?
Ah, right. That's a really interesting bit of technical resistance. The standard way to measure methane's climate impact is called GWP, global warming potential. It looks at its effect over a long time, usually 100 years. GWP is an alternative metric. It focuses more on the rate of change in emissions. Now, critics argue, and the sources point this out, that promoting GWP allows the livestock industry to potentially claim they're climate-friendly or even reducing their impact without actually cutting methane emissions much, as long as herd sizes aren't rapidly increasing.
So it's like changing the accounting rules to look better.
Some critics would certainly frame it that way. It's a way to potentially reduce the pressure for drastic change, a kind of policy friction.
And beyond policy maneuvering, there's also a straightforward counter-argument about nutrition, isn't there?
Yes, that animal foods provide essential nutrients that are often lacking, especially in developing countries. They argue these foods are critical for vulnerable populations. And they also point out that maybe the problem isn't current dietary guidelines themselves, but the fact that so many people don't follow them globally, maybe 40% non-adherence. So the argument goes we need better education and compliance with balanced diets, not necessarily a radical shift that could introduce new deficiency risks.
Which brings us full circle, really, back to that core lesson. Change is always happening. Innovation fuels it.
But it's constantly shaped by this push and pull. Schumpeter's creative destruction on one side and all these forces pushing for stability, government action, cultural norms, industry lobbying on the other.
Yeah, the three examples line up perfectly. Government bailouts rewarding bad bets, cultural resistance slowing down innovation in Japan, the food industry fighting back with labeling rules and metrics.
It really does seem like society is often making this trade-off, doesn't it? Trading potential long-term dynamism and wealth creation for the feeling, maybe the illusion, of short-term stability.
So if we go back to that Austrian critique one last time.
Their point isn't just that bailouts cost money, it's that they embed this moral hazard right into the system. It becomes enshrined in law, almost. You systematically reward the players who know they'll be rescued. So if capitalism really does need that constant churn, that risk of failure, to thrive and generate wealth in the long run, what's the ultimate price we pay when we use politics, whether it's bailouts or cultural inertia or industry protection, to try and minimize that risk?
Are we basically choosing a predictable, managed decline over a potentially more prosperous but definitely more turbulent future?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? Something for you to consider the next time you hear about efforts to stabilize or protect an existing industry or system. What's really being traded away?